Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Real Science with Chris Neal. Today we are going to do a deep dive into the FDA and what recently happened about a week and a half ago and how that affects us and what are the real details about that. A lot of people are saying things. We're going to get down to the nitty-gritty here. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump in. And also, if you like this kind of content, if you appreciate where we're headed, then please support us with a like and a subscribe and a share to a friendly face. Thank you so much. All right, so here we go. So there's been a major development in the world of peptides, and depending on what you may have seen on social media, you may have heard that BPC 157, TB 500, MOTs-c, and several other peptides were just approved by the FDA, but that is not what happened. But something important did happen, and it could eventually change the availability of several peptides through legitimate compounding pharmacies in the United States. So on July 23rd and 24th of 2026, the FDA's Pharmacy Compounding Advisory Committee, better known as PCAC, met to evaluate 7 peptide-related bulk drug substances for possible inclusion on the FDA's 503A bulks list. All of those details matter, and we're going to get into all of that in just a minute. The committee ultimately recommended adding 6 out of the 7 peptides listed: BPC 157, KPV, TB 500, MOTs-c, Semax, and Epitalon. If you're interested in these kind of things, or some of these names ring a bell, please hit up my channel because I do deep dives into many of those. The only peptide that did not receive a favorable recommendation was emdeltide, which is also commonly referred to as delta sleep-inducing peptide, or a lot of people know it as DSIP. So a lot of people on social media are saying that this is a major victory for the peptide community. And maybe in some small ways it is, but before anyone starts saying that the FDA has approved these peptides, legalized them, or declared them safe and effective, whoa. We need to back up, slow down, and understand exactly what this committee actually does, who the people are on the committee, what the vote means, and still what has to take place. So that's what this video is all about. Let's get started with how medications traditionally reach the market. So imagine a group of scientists working in a university laboratory. They identify a molecule that appears to influence inflammation, metabolism, wound healing, neurological function, or cardiovascular health. They publish these findings in a journal article. Another laboratory on the other side of the world reads this research, repeats part of the experiment, expands on it, and publishes additional findings. So over time, a body of preclinical research begins to accumulate year after year after year. Thus, the knowledge overall, the collective knowledge in the scientific community, also increases. So that process can continue for years or even decades. Eventually, a pharmaceutical company may come along that determines that this particular molecule that's been researched has enough therapeutic potential and enough, more importantly, commercial potential to justify spending the money required to develop it as a drug. That's a different thing altogether. The company selects a particular indication, such as, usually in the form of like a disease, such as ulcerative colitis, obesity, migraine prevention, or wound healing. It then begins the long process of toxicology testing, manufacturing development, and phased human clinical trials. It's very expensive. The indication selected for clinical development is not necessarily the only condition for which the molecule might be useful. That's really critical. It is the indication the sponsor believes offers the best combination of scientific feasibility, regulatory success, market demand, intellectual property protection, and most importantly, financial return. That distinction is extremely important. The FDA does not independently develop most drugs. A sponsor develops a product, funds the necessary studies, and submits the resulting evidence to the FDA. The FDA then evaluates whether the specific product has demonstrated adequate safety, effectiveness, manufacturing quality, stability, and consistency for its proposed use. This process can take many, many years and requires a tremendous financial investment. That creates an obvious economic issue for certain peptides. Many peptides are just naturally occurring signaling molecules or are closely related to molecules already produced by the human body. So although companies can sometimes patent peptide analogs, formulations, delivery systems, manufacturing processes, or specific medical uses, naturally occurring molecules may offer less attractive intellectual property protection than completely brand new novel drugs, meaning you don't get paid as much. That does not prove that pharmaceutical companies are suppressing peptides, but in my opinion, they are. It does mean that the traditional drug development system may provide less financial incentive to spend hundreds of millions of dollars studying a molecule that competitors may eventually be able to reproduce or work around. And this is one reason the peptide conversation has become so complicated. It would be a completely different story if the pharmaceutical companies and the FDA were solely, completely, 100% focused on your health and your ability to get available medications for whatever your needs are. But we all know that's not the case. There may be interesting laboratory research, animal research, mechanistic evidence, international experience, and thousands of patient anecdotes, but very few large, randomized, well-controlled, human phased clinical trials because of this issue right here. Anecdotes can identify signals and generate a hypothesis, but they cannot establish efficacy, determine the true frequency of adverse events, or replace controlled clinical studies. This is where compounding pharmacies enter the discussion. So, compounding is not some new loophole created by the wellness industry. Customized medication preparation existed long before modern, mass-produced pharmaceutical companies. Historically, pharmacists routinely prepared medications for individual patients on their own, at their own location. As industrial manufacturing expanded, standardized tablets, capsules, and injectable medications became more dominant. Compounding remained available for patients whose medical needs could not be met by a commercially manufactured product. Today, a traditional 503A compounding pharmacy generally prepares a medication for an individually identified patient pursuant to a valid prescription. A compounded drug is not FDA approved. Let me say that again. A compounded drug is not FDA approved. The FDA does not review each compounded formulation for safety, effectiveness, quality, or manufacturing consistency before it is dispensed. However, it is also incorrect to say that the FDA has no authority over compounding pharmacies, because they do have some authority, but just not over the ones that they lead you to think they do. Traditional 503A pharmacies are licensed and primarily supervised by state boards of pharmacy, but they also operate within somewhat of a federal framework established by the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. The FDA can inspect facilities, coordinate with state regulators, issue warning letters, and take enforcement action when a compounder operates outside the conditions established under federal law. So, the accurate statement is this: compounded drugs are not individually approved by the FDA, but drug compounding companies are still subject to some federal law and some FDA oversight, in addition to state pharmacy regulation. Now, let's talk about the 503A bulks list. When a 503A pharmacy compounds a medication from a bulk active pharmaceutical ingredient, that ingredient generally must qualify through one of three legal pathways. One of three. First, the substance can comply with an applicable United States Pharmacopoeia or National Formulary monograph. That's the first way. Second, There's no applicable monograph that exists, and the substance can be a component of an FDA-approved drug product that's already out there. Or third, when neither of these conditions applies, the substance must appear on the FDA's 503A bulks list. The July meeting that just happened a week and a half ago, it dealt with that third pathway. That's it. That's all they dealt with, was just the third pathway of the 50. What belongs on the 503A bulks list. So they reviewed several peptides, but they reviewed BPC 157 specifically for ulcerative colitis, KPV for wound healing and inflammation, TB 500 for wound healing, MOTs-c for obesity and osteoporosis, emdeltide for conditions including insomnia and opioid withdrawal, Semax for neurological conditions, and Epitalon for insomnia. Importantly, those were the uses evaluated during the proceeding. They do not represent approval for every benefit being promoted online. In total, 6 out of the 7 were recommended. 6 out of the 7 peptides listed were recommended to be placed on the list. Their concerns included limited human evidence, insufficient safety information, the possibility of immune reactions, peptide aggregation, impurities, inconsistent chemical naming, difficulties characterizing the active ingredient, and uncertainty about whether one supplier's version of a peptide is chemically equivalent to another supplier's product. So these are all legitimate regulatory concerns. With peptide medications, the name printed on the vial is not enough. Regulators must consider amino acid sequence, salt form, purity, degradation products, aggregation, sterility, endotoxin levels, storage conditions, and whether the finished product consistently contains what the prescriber intended. All of these regulatory factors are what makes medication in the United States, like legitimate medication in the United States, safe. Like that. So this is all very legit. What's interesting is that other sources of medications have no concern over that whatsoever, like the Research Chemical Company and not for human consumption. And essentially every single thing, every medication you can purchase that does not require a script from a medical practitioner, there is very little chance that anyone has any regulatory standing over any of these issues that we're talking about, and they are very important. FDA's current safety materials continue to describe unresolved concerns involving several of these peptides, and overall the advisory committee voted in favor of 6 out of the 7. The votes were relatively close. BPC 157, KPV, TB 500, they each received 8 favorable votes and 6 opposing votes with an abstention. MOTs-c also passed by a narrow margin. On the second day, the committee supported Epitalon and Semax, but voted against emdeltide. So now let's talk a little bit about the members in this advisory committee. At least 8 new members were added ahead of the meeting, and several members reportedly have professional or financial connections to medical clinics, in particular, alternative, more progressive medical clinics, pharmacies, businesses operating in the peptide and alternative medicine markets. So the members of the committee were essentially overhauled in April of 2026 by the current administration, led by RFK Jr. Supporters see this as bringing clinicians with real-world peptide experience into a regulatory process that has historically lacked that perspective, and that makes sense. Critics see potential conflicts of interest and question whether commercial enthusiasm is being given the same weight as controlled clinical evidence. But in my perspective, it's really a broader clinical representation can be a positive development, because these things do have a place. They do have a major role, and they can really help a lot of people in a very safe way. I work in this space, so I'm openly biased towards expanding responsible access and developing better systems for studying these compounds. I think all of that's fantastic. But expanding access cannot mean abandoning quality control. And that is the downfall that I've really seen a lot of. People are going online and just buying this stuff as cheap as they can get it from wherever they can find it without doing their due diligence of getting their labs, talking to an educated, licensed medical professional, that understands these things, and they're getting hurt, and there's no one there to blame it on. You can't call China and ask to talk to the pharmacist. You just can't do that. We should not be forced to choose between one extreme in which every peptide without $1 billion clinical development program is effectively dismissed, and another extreme in which any substance with exciting animal research and enthusiastic testimonials is treated as proven medicine, because that's not right either. There has to be a responsible middle ground, and that middle ground could include standardized chemical definitions, validated testing methods, strict sterility and purity requirements, transparent certificates of analyses, adverse event reporting, patient registries, informed consent, defined clinical indications, and structured collection of real-world outcomes. This would allow us to generate evidence while reducing the demand for unregulated products purchased from anonymous overseas laboratories. Because ignoring demand does not eliminate demand. When patients believe that a compound may improve healing, inflammation, metabolism, sleep, or neurological function, many are going to seek it regardless of whether the conventional medical system acknowledges it. When legitimate access disappears, some consumers move toward a gray or black market where there may be no reliable sterility testing. That's scary. No verification of peptide sequence, no medical screening, no temperature-controlled shipping, and no meaningful accountability when something goes wrong. That does not mean the answer is to automatically authorize everything. It means regulators should consider whether carefully controlled access may sometimes reduce harm more effectively than prohibition alone. We should also acknowledge the financial forces surrounding this discussion. The pharmaceutical and health products industry spends hundreds of millions of dollars each year on federal lobbying. I believe last year it was somewhere around $338 million, more than any other industry in the United States. The pharmaceutical industry outpaces them all in federal lobbying money spent by almost double the number 2 spot. That demonstrates substantial political influence, but lobbying totals alone do not prove that pharmaceutical companies directed the FDA's position on these particular peptides. But if you want to learn anything, you follow the money. Any claim of peptide-specific interference would require direct evidence. So that's to say that existing drug development systems is primarily built around products that can generate enough revenue to justify expensive clinical trials. Peptides that cannot attract that kind of investment right out the gate, they may remain trapped between promising preclinical science and inadequate human evidence for clinical trials. That is the fundamental problem we need to solve. So finally, what happens next? Well, the PCAC vote is advisory, and that's really it. It's advice given to the FDA. It's non-binding. The committee does not approve these peptides, and it did not automatically place them onto the 503A bulks list. The FDA must consider the committee's advice, their recommendations, and complete their own review, consult with the required process, and use notice and comment rulemaking before formally adding the substances to the list. There's no guaranteed 8 to 12 month deadline here, but that's generally what people say, that it's going to take about 8 to 12 months for something to take place in writing. The process could take months or potentially longer, depending on the FDA's policy decisions and the rulemaking process. As of today, the most accurate conclusion is this: 6 peptides received favorable recommendations from the FDA's Compounding Advisory Committee, but they have not become FDA-approved drugs, And the committee vote by itself is not final legal authorization for every 503A pharmacy to begin compounding them. This was a meaningful first step, but it's not the finish line. The real opportunity is not simply to make more peptides available, but that would be great, but it is to create a new framework that allows scientifically promising, economically neglected compounds to be evaluated efficiently, responsibly, and quickly. We need better evidence. We need higher manufacturing standards. We need transparent risk communication, and we need regulatory policies that recognize the difference between the absence of evidence and evidence that something does not work. The peptide community should welcome scrutiny, not run from it, because higher standards are ultimately what will separate legitimate performance and regenerative medicine from the dangerous, unregulated marketplace. And that's what scares me so much when I hear what so many people are doing out there. Get with a good clinical practitioner that is going to write you an actual script for these things so that you know that you can rely on the fact that the medication is safe and it's coming from a good place. Because everybody's out there to make money, and so many people out there are cutting corners in order to save a couple of bucks. And the corners that they're cutting is on your health, and it's never been worth that for me. So getting experienced clinicians, scientists, pharmacists, and patient advocates into the same room is a good start. But changing a medical development system that's been built over the last century will take some time. For now, the July PCAC vote represents a major shift in the conversation, but it's not an FDA approval. It's not proof that these peptides work, but a serious acknowledgement that the current system may need a better way to evaluate them. So thank you so much, guys, for watching. If you stayed till the end, if you like this kind of content, please give me a like, a subscribe, share this with a friend. If you have any recommendations of other things that you'd like for me to discuss, please hit me up in the comment section. Let me know what you think about the FDA and how they're doing and how they have benefited or impacted your health in a negative way. In the comment section below, I'd love to hear from you all. Thank you so much. And until next time, stay healthy.